with clickers. This is a panel discussion composed of faculty at various campuses. And we have Dr. Jason Bennett from chemistry at Erie, and Dr. Esther Siegfried, biology at Altoona, and then Dr. Wamboye, economics at Du Bois, and Dr. Amy Yenser, biology at Hazleton. So the format for this panel is answering a series of questions. Basically, what is your class like? How did you use clickers in your class? How have clickers helped your class? And what have you learned from using clickers? What we'll do for the format is, for question 1, for instance, the panelists will give their individual responses, and then we'll allot a little bit of time at the end of question 1 for some panelist-to-panelist discussion about what each has said. And then after that, before moving on to the next question, we'll allot a little bit of time for audience-to-panelist questions to clarify any points. And then after moving through to the fourth question, then at the end we can save a little bit of time for any cumulative discussion. So this is the question of what is your class like? And I will pass this off to Esther.
Okay, so that's me. I teach, I've used the clickers in an introductory level physiology course. It's Biology 141. These are predominantly freshmen. Many of my students are pre-nursing, tracking nursing, BBH, kinesiology, a real diversity of students. Somewhat unsophisticated in that many of them are freshmen. This is their first semester in college. Typically my class size is anywhere from 70 to 75 students per section. I typically teach 2 sections when I do teach the class. And the particular schedule I had when I used the clickers, it met Tuesdays and Thursdays for 75 minutes, which I actually think was an advantage because we had a little more time in the classroom to break it up and use the clickers. Okay, I'm going to put my glasses back on. I guess the next question is how do you use your clickers in the classroom, and I'll pass that over to Jason.
Am I supposed to answer the first one too, or?
Yes, please.
Okay. My name is Jason Bennett. I teach general chemistry at Penn State Erie, so usually it's second semester freshmen, about 80 students. Most of them want to be some kind of science major, either biology, physics, or chemistry for the most part. So they're generally at least interested in science, even if they're not interested in chemistry. Let's see here.
Those are your questions. So that'll actually be the next question. So just finish with the what is your class like, and then we'll move on to the
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, then I'll just pass it.
Yeah.
Question 1. Let's do question 1 now.
Okay.
Okay.
Question 1.
My class size, actually, I teach statistics and economic courses. I've used the clickers in the statistics class, and I have between, basically usually it's less than 30 students. And then in my marketing research class, I have about 7 students. And I use clickers in all the classes. I mean, I've had people tell me that, smaller classes, you don't need to use them. But it can be uncomfortable sometimes, even in the small classes, you have people looking at you and, they're not responding. And I found this to be so much easier, especially for my statistics class, which is almost a 2-hour class. And the entire time is much engaged. So I use both in my small and large classes.
And then we don't have to move off of this slide yet. So.
Okay. I'm Amy Yenser. I teach at Penn State Hazleton, and I've used this in 4 or 5 classes. So I've used clickers in every class that I've taught in the last 2 semesters. So they range from agriculture class, which had 18 students, to my physiology class, which has 80 students. And then I'll explain how I use them differently in those classes when we get to that question.
So then, just forward through.
All right, so how I use them in my class, this is the first semester I've used them. So if you're interested in how to actually start implementing them, I can help you with that. Basically, I use them 3 ways. First, I assign 1 daily problem for homework a day. I figure that's a better way than doing a whole chapter at once. And usually it's some kind of mathematically based problem, and so when they do it at home, they don't know. I mean, I'm kind of limited with multiple choices here, but they don't know what my choices are going to be, and so they have to do the work at home. And then when they come in, I have the homework question up, and they have to, class starts basically to answer it. So they can just come in and say, okay, that's my answer. And the nice part is after teaching the class a couple times, I kind of know where a lot of the errors are, so I can pick wrong answers based on where, you know, common mistakes are. And that way, when I go over the homework question, they actually have it right in front of them. They can make the, you know, they can follow along, see where their error is. So that's kind of the idea with that one. The other way I use it is to try to both do math problems in class as well as to try to point out misconceptions. I find that with freshmen, the biggest problem I have is transitioning them from memorizing, which is what they did in high school, to actually thinking. And I think that's a common problem for a lot of us that teach freshmen. And the biggest complaint I have is that when, you know, I'll give them a problem, for example, so like this question, before this question was like some kind of math-based problem. And when they solve it, then what I find that if I twist it around and ask them to like solve it backwards or something, to them it's a completely new problem. And then they get mad that I've never asked this question on a test. And so what I try to do is after I actually do the math-based question, I kind of come up with this type of question afterwards that, let's say I did change the problem. So let's see, which of the following statements are true if I change the ending temperature? So this was a heating question problem where you basically are measuring the energy that goes into phase change from solid to liquid to gas. And I don't know what the ending temperature was for the last question, but the point with this question was, well, let's say if I change the ending temperature, how would it change the problem and how you would attack it? And really what I want them to get at is that if they understand the concept and how to attack the problem, there's nothing I can really change to like trick them, you know, or throw them off. That if they truly understand, okay, well, if it goes up to this, then maybe I need to, you know, now know a different calculation or a new concept, but either way the question's the same. And so that's what I've been trying to kind of get through. We've only had one exam so far, and I feel like the exam scores are better a little bit overall, kind of into the B-B range, but the average, you still have your people that don't try, so that the average comes down a little bit. So I don't know any statistics yet, but so far I think the students are liking the interaction involved. Yes, sir? Oh.
Thanks. Okay, so I've used the clickers for full semester last semester in 2 sections of this 141. I use them almost every day. So I inform the students it was written into the syllabus. They have to purchase a clicker, bring it to class with you every day. Unlike some of the other panel members, I have not used them for exams. I use them as a way to encourage discussion and participation. So they get points for just making an answer of any kind, regardless of whether it's the right answer or not. Because, like Jason said, the biggest challenge, I think, is breaking them of their misconceptions. And they come in with ideas that are false, but they cling to them very dearly. And it's hard to convince them that these are false. It's hard for them to use terminology, and that's a big issue in biology, I think, and maybe other disciplines. We use terms with very specific meanings. They have specific relationships, and they're not comfortable using them. They then say, well, you tricked me on that question because you never used that word that way before. You know, they want a simple memorization. So I find these kinds of questions gets them to think a little bit out of the box. I give them break up the lecture. So, okay, let's do a couple of clicker questions. I give them about 45 to 60 seconds to answer those questions. I encourage them to talk to their neighbors. So I think it breaks up the class time. It gives them a little break. They get the chit-chat. You do kind of have to rap on the podium occasionally to draw them back because they get a little distracted, but it's not terrible, actually. And then we look at the questions and we talk about them. So the way like I said, I give them credit for just participation. The way I did it last year, I think they got 25 out of 500 points. It's amazing what they will do for 25 points. All of you who teach know this. They will go to great lengths to get that 5 extra credit, but they won't bother to turn in the assignments on time. So this kind of feeds into this like bonus idea. I think I might change this in the future, particularly after talking to some other people. They don't have to be there every single time because sometimes students, their batteries die, they forget them, their roommate stole it, they have all these excuses. So I keep track of it. The technology does it for you. It's very straightforward. I'm not, maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I'm not a very technology kind of person, but it is very, very easy to interface with. And so they get full credit if they attended 75% of the clicker questions. So I give them a little bit of leeway, and that keeps down the sort of emailing excuses about why the dog ate their clicker or whatever. Okay, so here's an example. We start off talking about macromolecules. A, monosaccharides, this would be an example of glucose. B, disaccharides, sucrose is an example. It is 2 monosaccharides linked in a covalent bond. The large molecule at the bottom would be an example of glycogen, which is made up of many glucose molecules linked in through covalent bonds into a very, very large molecules. All of these are considered carbohydrates. Only the mono and disaccharides are technically referred to as sugars. And strictly speaking, sugars are defined chemically a certain way. So you show the slide, you give them a handout, and they never quite get the connection. What fits into which categories? They don't know how to use the terminology correctly. So this clicker question, which when I first put out, I thought for sure everybody would get the right answer. So if you would like to play around with it, just to show you what it would look like, I would hit the start polling. And are they synced with the...
They're just not AA.
So you choose, so if we go, this was my lesson, if we go to the next slide, oops, let's go to now I'm just being stupid. Why is it not going?
You can't switch panels while the time.
There you go. So I'm going to stop the polling. So that's the thing, I screwed up. I do that all the time. This will appear, I will know that I screwed up. I will have data collected for that. I can go back and delete that. So you can always kind of fix it. Okay, why is this not? I stopped the polling. Why can't I move?
You might need to click on the slide.
There we go. Well, so this was the polling data that I got on that question. I thought for sure everybody would get that one right. And the correct answer, we skipped the question altogether. Okay, here's the sample question. So how are glucose and glycogen related? A, both are sugars. B, both are carbohydrates composed of many sugars. Only glycogen contains fat. So everybody knew that was the wrong answer. And D, glycogen is composed of many glucose molecules. And I would argue D is the correct answer. And I thought that was going to be a giveaway question, but it wasn't, because they had to make some subtle distinctions. And I think this is where this is most useful. We polled, we looked at the data, and then we talked about why was A the wrong answer. Why was D a better answer? And I think that's the most valuable part, that discussion that you have afterwards. And sometimes it leads to more questions. So another thing that I've done is questions on the fly. So we moved on in the semester, we talk about heart function, a little bit of anatomy, how blood flow is regulated, and so on. This is a complicated figure. I use the pictures on the board, on the screen. I write stuff on the board. Somebody asked a question, and I thought, that's a good question. We should all answer that question. So on the fly, I left the slide up, so they had the visual, and then on the board, I wrote a question. Okay, the blood that comes into this chamber of the heart, what can we say? Where is it coming from? Is it oxygenated, deoxygenated? And what's nice about it is it lets me just come up with a question on the fly. I don't have to prepare anything. I get to respond to the students. What the clicker technology does is it captures this screen, and then I have to remember the question that I asked. But I do get the polling data. So I did this on the fly, and the question I asked is, blood that travels from the lungs and returns to the heart is A, oxygenated and enters the left atrium, B, deoxygenated and enters the left atrium, oxygenated and enters the right atrium, deoxygenated and enters the right atrium. Now the way I use this, I actually wrote that on the board rather than have here. And maybe we can try to do, just so you can kind of see what it's like. So let's start the poll. And just, like again, you're not going to get points for getting it wrong. And I usually give them about 45 seconds, and they will talk to each other, and they will change their mind, and they get to change their answer. So, well, since we're smarter, we'll only do 30 seconds. Okay. And then those are our results, and then we can talk about them. Okay? So that it's really fast, it's pretty, it's something for them to look at, and it moves things along, I think, quite nicely in the classroom. Okay.
Is C the right answer?
I don't actually remember the question. Let me go back and look. So it's traveling from the lungs, so it's oxygenated, and it enters on the left side of the heart. So answer A is the correct answer. So not bad, half right. And that's the other thing you can talk about. You know, you can have any kind of discussion you want, and then you can write another question on the fly if you want to. So that's the part that I have to say I really enjoyed a lot. Okay. So really, like I said before, the polling and then the discussion afterwards I found to be the most useful. It reinforces the definition, it gives them practice using the terminology, it highlights the misconceptions, and they seem to enjoy chatting with each other, a little bit more back and forth. Even in a class of 70, a lot of them are reluctant to speak up. And so this way they can still participate without having to raise their hand and make themselves more visible, which I think is a positive. Okay.
Thank you. I mean, as I said before, my classes are not so large, but I like to interact with my students. I like them to. I get bored when they're sitting there and they're looking at their time, they're flipping their cell phones and all that. So clickers have given me a better way to actually interact with my students and keep them engaged, keep them active, and basically they learn and I teach less. Anyway, so how do I use the clickers? It doesn't do like this in my class.
So, I mean,
Is there a reason why it's not forwarding?
Click on the screen, like with a mouse.
Looks like the
It's
toolbar's
fun.
gone. Yeah, she clicked.
yeah, I think I clicked the toolbar off, so we'll have to,
Just restart the session.
Do I need
yeah. Sorry. You have to go back and restart the session.
I've never used a Mac before.
Oh.
Where would that be? Right here?
Sorry about that.
It's much simpler in the classroom, so that's a good thing.
Well, somebody doesn't screw it up.
Yeah, we don't have this fancy kind of, remotes.
You can just advance it with the laptop.
Yeah. And if you need to, just, oh. There you go. You can touch it.
Okay, there you go. I use clickers in every way that I can use them. I use them to take attendance. Obviously, we need the attendance records. And before, what I used to do was to have a sign-in sheet. And you guys can imagine at the end of the semester, you're in a hurry to turn in the grades and to give them this extra point for attendance. And you have to count all those many sheets for the entire semester. And it just took too much of my time. But with the clickers, it made it so much easier. I can, at the end of the class or beginning, I give them a question. Are you in the classroom today? And let's just go ahead and show that we are here. So they go ahead and say yes. Even if they say no, that's fine. So I ask them that. As long as they click something, they get points for it. Okay, so 8 are in the classroom. Let's just stop on that. And then, obviously, if I wanted to grade that beforehand, I can just have that, the graph show up, and then I select the correct answer. that automatically grades for me, and if I pre-assign the points, then those points will go into my grade book. So I don't have to go back again and start regrading that. And then, so I used that for attendance. And one thing I noticed was that I used to have about 63% attendance, on average 63%. And how do I know that? Because I used to keep those, sign-in sheets. And now I have about 96, actually this semester I have about 99%. And the reason why I have 99 is because one student, she just has other problems going on and she doesn't come to class. But students come to class, it's amazing. They ask me to, if I forget to bring the attendance cue, they ask me to, that I haven't done that and I should be doing it. And so that is kind of nice. Also, as I've said, I like group discussion, especially for those who teach math courses. I teach statistics, and it can be kind of hard when you're the one to go on the board and have to write everything, and you have to tell them everything, and start wondering whether they actually understand what you're teaching or not. So the clickers make it a little bit easier for me. Actually, what I do is that for every topic, I create a worksheet. So basically that worksheet is going to have all the questions on that topic, and we may have 3 lectures on that specific topic. So I give them a worksheet, they have the opportunity to work on those questions at home, and when you come to the classroom, when I cover a concept, then I can give them a question to discuss in their groups. They already know that, and they always want their group members to get right, because if I give them a question, and then I click to start, they pull in their answers. If I get a rainbow of answers, then I have to go on the board and try to work out the correct answer. So they don't want me to waste their time. They want to go to the next question. So they actually encourage and make sure that their group members actually get the answers correct. So this has actually increased group discussions. There is strong group synergy. We have group members helping each other. I have, people in the other groups helping other, group members. So this has really, improved group interaction, group discussion, and I think overall understanding, because students learn better, when others teach them. The other thing that I also noticed was that, the classroom is more relaxed. Because before then, I would be concerned with people talking in the classroom. They're discussing, and obviously they were discussing about boyfriends and girlfriends and how their Facebook is. But now they're discussing about questions on the worksheet. So that has really changed, things in the classroom and focusing more on the learning rather than other things outside of the classroom. So there's actually a very high level of engagement, and obviously I'm going through my tenure process, and I had, one of my peers come to the classroom, and he was really amazed by how students were relaxed, discussing, but at the same time the class, going on at a more comfortable, and a more efficient pace. The other one is that I do use it for feedback. This helps me to know whether I need to repeat a concept, whether I need to give more examples in the statistics class. What I do is that those questions I give them on the worksheet in the statistics class, I intersperse those questions, in my lecture. So let's say I can cover 3 slides or 2 slides, and then I have a question. That question, they do it. I can have probably maybe 3 questions, depending on how I think, how hard the concept is. And then when they go over that question and they get correct, I don't have to go over the other 2 questions. So I can just skip them and go to the next one. And I've found that, instantly I know whether students have understand the concept or not. And I can decide whether to focus more time on that or to skip. So overall, it has made things much more efficient, and I think better use of my time than I used to use before. Obviously, the cell phone thing, we don't like that. So students, instead of having the cell phones on their desk, they have the clickers on their desk. And it's amazing. I mean, you guys have seen this. You tell them, you can just tell them so much that you need to keep your cell phones away. Stop having those on the desk. Stop this. But now you don't have to do that, because the time they're wasting on their phone, they should be clicking in their answers. Their group members are, encouraging them to get something correct, because we are going to spend more time if they get it wrong to go over it. And for those who know, they don't want to spend that time, trying to go over the thing that they already know. And also, I use that in my marketing research class. It's a research-intensive class. So with that, what I do is that I give them notes beforehand. I give them my PowerPoint slides beforehand. So I ask them to read those PowerPoints, and then when you come to the classroom, I teach using questions. So instead of having to go over the slides, I can just use the questions. If they get that correct, then I understand that they actually read those notes, and we can discuss a few things and then move on. So again, that has made things much easier, even though it's a small classroom. The other thing that I tried to use was surveys. Obviously we want surveys to be anonymous, right? But for this one, the surveys won't be anonymous, because you'll know if they registered their clickers, you will know who said, yeah, I don't like that class, I don't like this. You're going to know that. But anyway, if the surveys are not all that sensitive, I've used that just to see whether the clickers are helping them or not, and that has given me immediate feedback. And also I can show them the graphs, the polling statistics, and they can see whether, okay, many say they understand, others say they don't understand, so how should we go, about this? And all that, I think I try to use in every way that I can use, because it's made my teaching a little bit, so much easier. And in whichever way that I can, integrate in my classroom, I try to do that. All right, I think that should be the next person. Just to give you an example of the questions that I do in the classroom, this is a statistic basic definition question. Okay, let's go ahead and answer that. Already I have the answer there, but you can choose anything. So obviously the answer will not be there. I don't show them, they're polling, what they're polling in. I show them after they have answered. And then afterwards, I see if they have it correct, perfect. We move on. If they have it wrong, we discuss. And sometimes what I do is that I ask, for those who got it right, why did you give that as the correct answer? Or for those who got it wrong, why did you, what was the reasoning behind the answer that you provided? And that helps me to understand instantly, why they provided and what I should be emphasizing on. Again, as I said before, once you close the poll, you can always instantly correct, grade. So if I pick A as my correct answer, then that means that it's already registering in my grade book, and I don't have to go back. I mean, before, if I was to give them paper, exams, I have to go back home and start grading. But this one, it grades it for you. So you can just import the grades. What I do is that I do a monthly, updating in the in Angel. So I import the totals at the end of every month, and they have it there. And also another thing I should emphasize is that this is my second semester. In my first semester, it was an extra credit thing. So the clicker questions were extra credit. And still I had people, students were excited. They used to come to class despite, that it didn't constitute much of their final grade. But this semester, what I've done is that it's part of, the final grade. It's 15% of their final grade. And they come to class, they're excited. They don't ask me those questions that I had earlier that they always ask. That, did I miss anything today? When I wasn't in class, did I miss anything? I don't get those questions. Because if they don't come to class, they miss two things. One, they miss the attendance, which is extra points. And then they miss the worksheet questions. So all that make them to, to come to the class. A question that requires more calculations like this, I'll give them a few minutes, and surprisingly, it doesn't take even a minute for them to finish the calculation. I have more harder questions than this, and it takes them a very short time. But before, when I used to give the same worksheets, they'll take so much time, and some of them, they're not doing anything. You'll go around and they're just doing something different rather than working on that question. But But because they know that they need to get the answer and send in their answer, they get to work on that question immediately sooner than they used to do than they used to do before. But you can time them if you want. I don't time them because I encourage them to understand what they're doing rather than just giving in their answers. So they have some more time, but usually it doesn't take more than a minute, to get it done. This would be, for example, in my marketing research class, basic questions to see if they understood the definitions, but I include more complex questions just to get their understanding. As again, overall, I found myself not to be lecturing, but I'm teaching more, basically teaching more in a more efficient way. Students, I think they have taken more, they're in charge of their own learning, and that's what I've seen so far in the past 2 semesters.
Thank you. Well, I'm the person in between you and lunch, right? I always get to finish up. So how I've used clickers, I guess I don't have a summary slide here. I couldn't remember what I submitted. I've used them in my agriculture class to see what students know before I talk about a topic. So, for example, I have just a little kind of, not really practice quiz, but a few questions on genetically modified organisms to see what students think about this and what they know before I even talk about it. That way I know how in-depth I need to go, or where my starting point is, really. In my more, I don't want to say advanced classes, but classes for majors like anatomy and physiology, I use them more so for reviews before exams. And I'll make up like 30 questions, and about half of the lecture before the exam will be spent on the practice test. And they loved that. At first I thought, well, I'll just give it a try this one time and see how it goes. And they loved it so much, they all commented on my SRTEs that they loved the exam reviews. After class, then I would post them in a PDF format on Angel. So they had access to them to study for the exam. And so I had to continue using that in physiology, where I have 80 students and 45 clickers. So unlike some of the other panel members who their students own a clicker that they bring to class, I received my clickers through a grant, and so I just hand them out in class. Actually, I set them at the back of the room. They pick up their number. That saves some time. But in physiology, the way I do this, and I think it actually works better than if everybody had their own clicker, because I realize now that having 2 or maybe even sometimes 3 people sharing one clicker, they're actually discussing the questions. And so even the students that would normally sit there in the back of the class all by themselves and not talk to anybody, they're kind of forced to engage, and maybe they're still kind of quiet. You just can't change somebody's personality, but the person next to them is talking to them and talking them through the question, and they're helping to learn with each other. It's really good interaction. I do use them for quizzes in my non-science major courses, which is Biology 155 and Bi-Sci 4. And the reason I have this practice quiz is this is the first thing that I give them. I hand out clickers. They're not assigned yet. I just say, we're just going to practice today, just because my students, most of them haven't used clickers yet. And I just want them to get used to the fact that you have to turn it on. They sometimes forget to turn it on, and how to answer the question. So I just had this little practice quiz, but it is graded, and I won't go into the details since you kind of already explained how that works. But I'm not going to make you guys answer all these questions. But this was just a very simple one to have them practice and show that you really don't need to have a lot of experience in using technology to answer these questions. So this one, I think you guys might actually want to answer, because this is my favorite question. And I know I'm out of time, so we'll just kind of wrap up then. Make sure that they're still turned on. You should have a green light at the top, because I know that there's more than 8 people in here. you guys were kind of petering out on answering questions, so we're going to wake back up again, and right before we go to lunch, we're going to talk about food. Okay. I often use the clicker questions with the series so that I'm not attached to the computer. I never had the instructor clicker before, so okay, and I can usually move the results, but you guys got this correct. 55% of you knew that this is chicken. Lovely. Mechanically processed chicken. Now everybody will avoid the chicken for lunch. But since we are kind of out of time, I mean, I could talk more about my use of clickers, but I want to save time for questions. Oh, I then post the answers after. When I'm giving a real quiz, I go through all the questions, and then I go through all the answers. Rather than stopping in between after each question to break it up, I show the answers last. So here are the answers, chicken. Okay, so I guess we'll take questions.
So this is the question of how clickers have helped your class, and we can go through this really quickly. So I know that you had...
Yeah, I think we would all agree it encourages class participation and class attendance. That's something I've definitely seen. Interaction, and I found it useful for catching, with course you've taught many times, you know where the common misconceptions are, but every so often they just really surprise you with something that you were sure everybody knew, and then they didn't.
I would just add to that, the biggest thing that I like about using the clickers is when after I've given it a quiz, whether it counted or not, and I see the results, I can quickly address the issues or confusion, because, other than seeing the immediate results, I may not have known that that was a confusing point, so I can clarify.
I think I agree with everyone. Actively engaging students, immediately giving the feedback, and basically not repeating things. Sometimes you think the students have not understood what we've taught them, but actually they have understood them. And the clickers just reinforces that and says, yeah, they understand, move on. And that has helped me to do that. And again, attendance, which we sometimes have hard time, students keeping up with that. And it's done a good job in that area.
But in addition to engaging the students, I think it's made me a more engaging lecturer, because I'm now more apt to walk in the audience and talk to people as we're going through these questions. So I think it's also made me a more active lecturer.
Okay, so this is also the... This was Esther's slide.
So I just sort of sat there and thought, would I use it again? Why and why not? It is very easy to use. That was a real plus, I have to say. It does take up lecture time, and I know a lot of us are loath to give up that time, but I think it's an effective use of lecture time. So you do have to, I ran out of time, and so I'm going to have to rethink how I, use the class time. I initially had a lot of problems with people not knowing how to use the clickers properly, and I failed. What I didn't do right the first time is I didn't post right away. Their use, so sometimes it took a while to realize that they weren't using the click. I think you wanted monthly, weekly, with some periodicity, post the grades so that they know, even if you're not scoring them, just so they know that the clickers are working. And then, you have the students who have all kinds of excuses, and that took up some time. But again, I think if I had been more diligent about posting, I would have avoided some of those problems. I don't know who has a clicker.
I think this might be Amy's slide.
No, I think that's mine as well. Yeah, and we've talked about this, something that I think I might use this in conjunction with is trying to flip the classroom a little bit. Make them do a little bit more reading at home, and then using the class time. I'd like to try to do more case studies, which I think would be appropriate in a physiology course, but it requires them to have reviewed the content before they approach it. And so I'm going to try to work that into some of my classes a little bit better, I think.
Okay, so basically this is, Penn State has clickers.psu.edu, the website that you can go to with the screenshot there on the right for more information for students, for faculty, and then any questions can go to clickers@psu.edu. So we'll open the last couple minutes up if you guys have some general questions.
Question.
So many of your disciplines are the sciences where you have right and wrong answers, and there's a lot of that, and it seems like that's reflected in the questions and the things that you give. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you use this in the humanities or psychology or social science. I know you mentioned a case study approach. Can you elaborate on how that would work?
Yeah, so some answers may still be right or wrong, like, which of the following factors would affect blood pressure, right? But there could be multiple right answers. So if depending on how you do your grading scheme, and then you could just use it as a point of discussion. Yeah, all three things contribute. Which would you go to first? Which is more, there doesn't have to be a right answer. You can just give them points for responding and then talk about why all four may be right answers. And in some of the intro level non-major bio courses, that might be appropriate as well.
Yeah, the reason I don't use them for graded quizzes in my higher level classes is because I still give them paper ones where they write out more short answer. That's one downfall of clickers. It's A, B, C, D, and that's it. So I use them for reviews and things, but I think, if you don't have a right or wrong answer, you can have different kind of opinionated choices, a range of choices, and just see what the general consensus of opinion might be in a humanities type class. I'm not sure.
And I think the overall objective is to encourage participation. So again, clickers give you the option just to give them participation points than to actually grade them right or wrong. And if you don't like lecturing continuously, that would be a nice break just to give a question there, and they can give an answer. And another thing that I've done because in statistics class, I do have a lab session. And that requires, for example, they generate histograms or do some different kinds of graphs. So first, I give them a question, tell them, ask them to generate a graph or do something. And then I give them my answer and tell them, if you got it correct, click A, otherwise B. So, you can come up with different innovative ways just to encourage, participation and to make sure that students are, doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Speaking about doing what they're supposed to be doing, I use clickers in a technical course where they're given a problem and I give them a certain amount of time to respond, but I find that, the majority of the students will finish in 1 minute, but then you have maybe 5 students that need 2 minutes, and I encourage them to work together and discuss. And so all the ones that are done first are done discussing and then moving on to talking about what they're doing that weekend. And yet I feel like I need to give them, the other students, a few more times. Do you have any suggestions on what to do to discourage the off-track discussion while the other students are still trying to work and think?
I'm actually kind of encountering the same thing
Okay.
right now, because this is the first semester. And the one thing I'm thinking of maybe doing is having like a spin-off question for those that are a little bit more advanced, to still challenge them, that they wouldn't necessarily be graded on, but something for them to do besides twiddle their thumbs. Because I think a lot of them, if you gave them something, they would do it, they want it, but they have nothing else to do. So I've kind of thought about maybe doing that next year, because I have the same problem that, you're waiting and how many students and all that and stuff.
And I have the lecture worksheets, and those worksheets, I give them all the questions we'll be covering. So if you're done with this question and I'm waiting for someone else, you can go ahead and work on the second question. So that keeps them going, working on other questions as I wait for the others to get done.
Kind of related, I don't know if you have issues of students with disabilities, and if it's anything's graded, we have the students I have with the disabilities often get time and a half. And in a bigger classroom setting, you can't single them out. Has anybody had to deal with that, or how do you deal with that?
I've had students with those situations, and I tell them to come to class 10 minutes late, because if it's a graded quiz, because I give the quiz right at the beginning of class. It takes 10 minutes because I give them 45 seconds a question, approximately 10 minutes, and I have another version of it printed. I just print the slides in a PDF, format. So I give them the paper version of the quiz that they take in my office. Either beforehand, or if they can't take it before class, then I tell them don't come for 10 minutes, and then they'll take it after class. So they still get their extra time, they just don't take it with a clicker.
So sort of responding to both of those last two questions, the disability first. I'm Dave Test, I'm the group leader for technology classrooms at University Park. If there's a disability need and it's a physical disability like a vision problem or something, there is a clicker that's available. These new iClicker Pluses have Braille on them, so that's one of the things. You can also get a vibrating clicker. So depending on the disability of the student, it can be accommodated with the clicker system. The clicker system is also screen reader compatible, so that if the student is viewing what you're viewing and they have a screen reader, they can also participate that way. As far as the issue with some students are done sooner and then they feel like they're screwing around while the other students are answering, that to me is sort of the perfect opportunity for peer instruction, where instead of giving them a question that's simple enough that they can finish it on their own, give them a question that's hard enough that they really should probably be working with their partner, with someone next to them. Because what that lets them do is, instead of one person singling it out and figuring it out on their own, they're able to do that, but at the same time they're teaching the person that's next to them. And so just instead of sort of rote response to the question, they're actually able to think out the process, talk about it with somebody else. They might be challenged by that other person, and so it gives them an opportunity to learn by teaching instead of just learn by doing.
Thank you to the panelists. We should probably go ahead and break for lunch. Thanks for joining us. And if you have any questions about clickers, of course, clickers at USU.edu is a good place to send them in. Thank you.